Well, good morning, everyone. Welcome to this IMF press conference on the Article 4 for the Euro area. My name is Rafael Anspach with the IMF's Communications Department. You are familiar with the Article 4 consultation of the IMF. This is a yearly assessment of economic developments and economic policies that the fund conducts for every member country. Today, we're presenting the IMF staff's assessment for the Euro area for 2023. This assessment is reflected in the concluding statement that we distributed to you under embargo. Now, let me turn to our speakers of today. I'm delighted to be joined by our Managing Director, Madam Cristalina Georgiana, and the European Department Director, Mr. Alfred Kammer. Madam Georgieva will have introductory remarks, and then we'll be happy to take your questions. With that, Madam Georgieva, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Good morning to everybody. Thank you for being here bright and early. My gratitude to Pascal Donahoe for chairing a very good discussion yesterday on our Article 4 consultation concluding statement. And let me go straight to the key messages from the statement. First, yesterday, as you know, the Euro area celebrated 25 years. And it was very fitting that our core message was the EU area has shown remarkable resilience in the aftermath of Russia's invasion of Ukraine, in the face of the largest trade loss in decades, a testament to the decisive policy actions of European leaders to secure gas supplies and to cushion firms and households against the impact of high energy prices. While the economy slipped into a mild technical recession in early 2023, we expect economic activity to pick up later in the year gradually and to finish the year in positive growth territory. Current assessment 0.8% growth this year, 1.4% next year. Stay tuned. In July, we are going to come up with our updated projections. We don't expect much of a difference in those projections. Inflation has started to decline from historically high levels, but still well above target. And uncertainty remains elevated, with risk skewed to the downside for growth and to the upside for inflation. Therefore, our top near term in the months and years right ahead of us is to keep bringing inflation down to target, which we expect would happen only sometime in 2025. While preserving financial stability. So how do we go about it? Very telegraphically, monetary policy should continue to tighten and then remain in restrictive territory for some time until inflation expectations are firmly anchored and inflation trends towards target. We welcome yesterday's decision of ECB to tighten. We also welcome the communication that surrounded this decision. Second, in the current economic environment, fiscal policy needs to stay tight over 23-24. Why? To reduce overall demand, push inflation down, and put pressure on interest rates to go down so we can lower risks for financial stability and, of course, put a sound foundation for growth. Talking about financial stability, the banking system in Eurozone is resilient on the aggregate, but of course, tightening of financial conditions can expose vulnerabilities, and this is why we emphasize the role of supervisors to assess banks' exposure to interest rates, to liquidity and credit risks, including those that are related to real estate. We are very much aligned with the discussion that took place yesterday and will continue today, that financial stability in the euro area requires strengthening its financial architecture, implement Basel III, make meaningful progress on banking and capital markets union. And actually, we had a very substantive discussion on capital markets union, why success there is also linked to success in building the banking union further. Swift implementation of the swift advancement of the discussions around the EU economic governance reforms to anchor fiscal policy as quickly as possible. So in 2025, budgets are on sound foundation is something we strongly support. And let me finish with something that has worried us for some time, weak growth projected over the next years. The only way we can correct that is through decisive action on structural reforms to create the conditions for faster growth in the future. And in that context, I want to very warmly welcome the EU being a first mover on artificial intelligence with the Artificial Intelligence Act to bring regulation so you can capture the benefits, but manage also the risks of technology we all rely on. The EU continues to be a leader on greening. Our advice is, yes, please do it, but be careful that subsidies and other instruments are aligned with the single market, that you don't undermine what has worked for European people so well for so many years. We also talked a little bit about the implementation of recovery and resilience plans. They are in that same spirit of boosting productivity and growth, so important. Overall, I want to finish where I started, resilient euro area, but very uncertain time. And the more leaders can do together to charter a path for faster growth, the better. And with this...
Thank you so much, Managing Director. So we'll first begin in the room. I also see that we have some colleagues online. If you could state your name and affiliation, and I'm going to start with the gentleman right there. Yes, Bloomberg.
Jorge Valero with Bloomberg. Good morning, Madam Managing Director. Two questions. The first one on the monetary policy. You say that the ECB should continue tightening. It seems very likely, in the words of Madame Lagarde, that there will be another hike in July. But would you consider that it's necessary also another hike in September? And secondly, in the context of the fiscal rules review, do you think that it makes economically sense to have a fixed benchmark, debt reduction benchmark of 1% as Germany has proposed, or this is a pro-cyclical proposal? Thank you.
Thank you very much for these two questions. On the monetary policy stand, our recommendation is for tightening bias. We have to make sure that inflation is firmly on a downward trend and reaches target. What that means has to be data driven. So ECB will continue to monitor very closely developments and take decisions from that point of view. On your second question, we support the Commission's proposal. We welcome the fact that discussions are now moving more into negotiating territory. We think that the Commission's proposal is going to help with a more counter-cyclical stance. So we support the direction that they outlined in this proposal. Obviously, negotiations are now to start, and we hope they would advance swiftly, so there is a sound framework to bring debt down in the EU in a way that, as I said, is counter-cyclical, not pro-cyclical.
Thank you, Managing Director. Politico, yes, please.
Good morning, Paula Tama for Politico Europe. Two questions, if I may. The first is on your staff projections. I wanted to ask about the discrepancy between the figures you give, especially for 2024. They're 4 times higher than the latest Commission estimates. So why the discrepancy? And secondly, if I may, on Tunisia, I wanted to ask, where are you at in the negotiations on the loan? And if you consider that European politicians' pressures to release the funds ahead of the government implementing the reforms are something that are undue, or if the EU should go ahead before the IMF releases its loan. Thank you.
On our projections, actually, the trend is very similar. In 23, growth under 1%, and then in 24, a modest acceleration. As I said, we are going to have an updated projections in July, and at that point we would see what data tells us. But based on what we are observing now, we don't expect a significant change. We are talking about a time of exceptional uncertainty. And in that context, we make projections that we have to ascertain periodically. You know, it's like this last year, it's like we are walking in fog. So what do you do when you walk in fog? You very, very carefully put one foot in front of the other, and you do course correction if you have to. But again, these are not big differences. In terms of trends, we are very much aligned. And by the way, that came very clearly yesterday from the Euro group discussion. On Tunisia, we have been working very closely with the Tunisian authorities for quite some time. We have made significant progress on agreeing on a program. This program has to be owned by the country. Tunisia is in a better position today because tourism picked up. That applies to all contact-intensive industries countries. In other words, tourism countries are doing quite well. They were hit in 2020. They're now benefiting from everybody's desire to travel. In other words, the pressure is not as dramatic as we feared it may be. Europe has a strong tradition of engaging and supporting with Tunisia and supporting Tunisia. We are very grateful for that. Actually, we welcome the fact that European leaders have taken that proactive approach to support Tunisia. And we are very much aligned that for Tunisia, it would be great to implement reforms that make the economy stronger and prospects for the people of Tunisia brighter. And on the key components of reforms, we have no differences. It is on the details how reforms can be pursued that we are still having some work to do. And just to make it very clear for the IMF, our aspiration is to support a dynamic economy and one that is fair, where poor people are not paying for subsidies to rich people. How exactly to do that, I'm sure we will agree.
Thank you very much, Managing Director. I have Sam Fleming first, and then the gentleman in the blue shirt.
Good morning, Sam Fleming from the Financial Times. Two questions. One, the European Commission will shortly be introducing legislation on a digital euro ahead of a decision later this year by the ECB. I just wondered, broadly speaking, it looks like the Eurozone will be one of the forerunners, at least in Europe and some of the Western economies in terms of a digital currency. Do you see the benefits of this outweighing the potential risks of disruption to the banking system from such a project? And my second unrelated question, a bipartisan bill was introduced in the Senate this week to do with the confiscation of Russian sovereign assets. And I wondered if you could talk about how the IMF assesses the risk to the global financial system, the stability risk that could stem from such a course of action, and whether you see risks in pursuing that sort of thing. Thanks.
Okay. On digital euro, it is very timely for the EU to engage in this on this subject. Why? Because what we see is over 115 countries today are engaged at different stages in pursuing CBDCs. We have the strongest demand for technical assistance coming from countries interested in that subject. We know that some of these advances are quite significant. Well, of course, the first to cross the finish line was Bahama with the sand dollar. But more interesting is how far the piloting of the digital yuan has gone. The latest data we had was that the pilot covers 118 million participants. So the EU is right not to fall behind from these developments. You're putting an important question. In the EU, mobilization of finance is done primarily through the banking system. We actually yesterday discussed that it is important for the EU to move more proactively in building a capital market union, so there can be a higher contribution to making financial assets work harder through capital markets. And in that sense, with banks providing the bulk of financing, of course, it is very important that the EU is very cautious and careful how the development of the digital euro is going to be carried forward. I actually appreciate the fact that a lot of attention is paid to that. And in that sense, the timeline that is being defined is one that allows for engagement with the banks and making sure that there is no disruption in the way banks contribute to growth and to the well-being of Europe. So to sum that up, we think our sense is that this is a very deliberate and careful approach that is being taken. I mean, reality is the EU cannot stay out of what is happening in the rest of the world. It's a good thing that they are embracing on this journey. To your second question, it is. Well, let's see what the bill is going to say. You know that this is a discussion that takes place in many countries, has to be very carefully pursued. From the perspective of the IMF, we want to see a thoughtful assessment of risks. Not these are sovereign decisions. It's not for us. But of course, our job is to make sure that you walk into a decision and the implementation of this decision with your eyes wide open.
Thank you very much, MD. The gentleman, I'm afraid this is going to be our last question.
Michael Sauger, Der Spiegel. The German government yesterday has voted in favor of state aid of 10 billion euros for Intel to build a chip factory in Germany. So are we now in the subsidies race the IMF has warned for?
Do you know that particular?
On the 10 billion?
Yeah. Do you know the visa? I'm going to ask my colleague to answer this particular, I mean, on the specifics, but broadly on your question, what we recognize is that we are at a time when accelerating the green transition is absolutely critical. We are behind. We have a target to cut emissions between 25 and 50% between now and 2030. We are nowhere near reaching that target. So when countries concentrate on how they can push for accelerated transition and use subsidies in that context, we do not see that as an immediate problem if it is implemented carefully and if there are clear guardrails to avoid a subsidy war that would in the end lead to more protectionism, and we know the consequences of it: slower growth, more insecurity. We have been warning about the risks of fragmentation that can bring global GDP significantly down if done poorly. I don't know whether you have seen this research. Trade fragmentation can cost the world economy somewhere between 0.2% and 7%. 7% is $7 trillion. This is like wiping out Japan and Germany combined from the global economy. And the difference between 0.2 and 7 is how we approach this question of security of supplies and accelerating the green transition, thoughtfully and carefully, or with a great deal of ignorance to the consequences. And now, I'm sorry I'm giving you this bigger story, and now to the 10 billion. Mr. Alfred.
No, just to emphasize, when it comes to subsidies in this context, when we are looking at supply chains and securing supply chain, the issue is really one of global diversification in order to ensure that and not necessarily onshoring them. The second point, I think, is going to be very important, and Cristalina already emphasized that in the context of another question, that we need to preserve the European single market. Because larger countries will have more firepower in terms of providing subsidies, but that should not infringe on the European single market, which is a unique and a very important achievement in the European Union.
In the world of instantaneous access to information, I just saw what you're referring to. I'm sorry, I wasn't initially aware. And I would finish where Alfred was, that we have to be always very careful what we do. Is it strengthening supply chains, which we now know require more attention, or is it leading to a risk of creating a damage on the functioning of the European single market? Do this assessment carefully. Yeah.
All right. Well, with that, I would like to thank you, Madam Georgieva, Mr. Kammer. Thank you all for coming. And this concludes our press conference. Thank you very much.
It never stops to intrigue me. How come that we have this huge room and people opt to sit further away. But never mind. Thank you very much. It is so kind of you to come so early in the morning. Thank you.